This meeting is being recorded, and now I'm about to put it on the Facebook feed. Give me a second while it loads. Hold on. Okay. Give me a second while I have to set it up. Okay. Takes time. Give me a second. Oh, this is my wife's computer, so it's going to be on her Facebook feed. Okay. So all her friends will be able to watch it then. Okay. I'm sure she won't mind. And if she does, well, okay, continue. Okay, that should be streaming live. Give me a second. Right, going live. Wait for it to go. Preparing to live stream the meeting. Okay, so now if anybody wants to turn off, they can turn off. Okay. Welcome everybody to the Rabbi Yahrtzeight Ben David Aryeh Memorial Lecture. This is his first Yahrtzeight. It's actually a sad time. Yesterday, the 19th, was the first Yahrtzeight of Rabbi David Feinstein, so it was a difficult time. But on a happy note, tonight, the 20th, is also my daughter Esti's birthday. So tonight is her Hebrew birthday. She's turning 8, so it's a happy day for her too. We are honored to have my father, Rabbi Saunders the First. We like to say Rabbi Saunders the First and Second because that's like very English, you see. You have Queen Nis the First, Queen Net the Second, right? The Pope the First, Pope John the Second, whatever. So we have Rabbi Saunders the First and Rabbi Saunders the Second. Let me pin his video. So my father has been a member of the United Synagogue Rabbinate for over 30 years. He held the record of being the youngest ever appointed rabbi in the history, in the 300-year history of the United Synagogue Rabbinate, when he was appointed the rabbi of Blackpool Hebrew Congregation, which has since amalgamated with close by St. Anne's, when he was, I believe, 23, Dad, right? You were 23 at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that record has since been broken. So I don't think you are holding that record anymore. But my dad also was in school. He was in Jews College when Rabbi Sachs was a professor. So he has many insights to Rabbi Sachs, both as a rabbi and a professor and as a friend. He was the rabbi in Woodford and Sale and Higher Broughton, Higher Cromswell Shul. I think all 3 times you were ordained by Lord Jacobovitz, right? Because you never changed shuls. Rabbi Sachs was the head, am I right?
Correct.
Right, so you were never ordained in a shul by Rabbi Sachs, but he came to our shul many times, and now my dad is a local councillor. He has gone into local politics. He has taken all that rabbinate skills that he has amassed and is now in local politics. So without any further ado, let me make you the pinned video so everybody can see you. Pin video, right. Dad, take it away. I'm going to mute myself.
Yes, thanks, Zevi. Well, I should say good evening, everyone. It's the early hours of the morning here, about 12:37 a.m. British summertime, Greenwich Mean Time, daylight saving. But it's okay. I've just had a coffee, so I should be able to stay awake. It shouldn't be a problem. It's a bit like, for me, like the Shavuos nights and so on, where you sort of learn late at night. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to be with you all and to be with my son, Rabbi Zevi, and the wonderful congregation that he leads. You're quite right. I was never inducted, as we say here, by Rabbi Sachs, and although I was invited to his installation, I think is the word we use for the chief rabbi, I was unable to attend because I had a long-standing wedding that I had to conduct on that day, and so I wasn't present at his installation, although I was present at the installation of the present chief rabbi, Chief Rabbi Mervis, who was installed by Rabbi Sachs. So of course I heard his speech at that installation, but I wasn't at his own installation. As I think you introduced me as Rabbi Saunders the first. You said it's very English. I think it's also quite American. Don't you have sportsmen like Davis Love the Third and so on? And anyway, whatever, senior, junior. But either way, it's a pleasure to be here, and very poignant and a great honor for me to speak about my Rebbe and my mentor, the late Chief Rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks. I go back with him many, many years, probably 40 years or so, till way back way back before he was the chief rabbi. I'm going to speak a little bit about that period. But I find it interesting that we're speaking tonight through the wonders of modern technology, Zoom. He was actually one of the first to embrace these sort of modern technologies when he became the chief rabbi. He embraced Facebook, Twitter. Not sure there was Zoom in those days, but I particularly remember him saying on one occasion, because like me, he himself was not the greatest techie, certainly not back then. Maybe he became a little bit more, I suspect, technologically minded. But I always remember him saying to a meeting of Rabbanim once, apparently I tweet. And that was when Twitter first came out, and his staff tweeted his shiurim, his talks, etc., on his behalf, but he admitted that he hadn't a clue how to actually do it at the time, which, as I said, gave rise to me his rather famous words, apparently I tweet. Anyway, let me give you a little bit about my recollections of Rabbi Sacks, Lord Sacks, particularly going right back to the time when I was a new rabbi and I was doing a course part-time in what was then called Jews College. Actually, it wasn't part-time. It was a full-time course together with a full-time position as a rabbi at the time in the United Synagogue. It was only part-time in my life, but it was officially full-time. And he was the principal of what was then called Jews College, which is perhaps the nearest equivalent to Yeshiva University that you've got in the States, but on a much smaller scale. And I wrote at the time of his sad passing last year, I wrote an article in my other son's newspaper, the Jewish Weekly, which comes out in England, my son Yossi. In fact, the cup of coffee that I'm using now, I don't know if you can see it, it's a mug for the Jewish Weekly, a bit of an ad there. I wrote that, in my opinion, although he achieved much in his life, particularly as chief rabbi, and after he retired as chief rabbi, he was knighted by the Queen. Before he became Lord Sacks, he was Sir Jonathan Sacks, then he became Lord Sacks. He was given virtually every accolade you could imagine. He was a wreath lecturer. A wreath lecturer is, every year the BBC have a series of lectures given by one particular person in memory of their founder, Lord Reith. And you can imagine that it's a great honor to be asked to give the Reith lectures, and he gave the Reith lectures one year. He won prizes for his work, and he was honored with all sorts of things all over the world. I've just seen something come up saying Arnold Saunders left. I'm assuming. Right. Okay. Sorry. Right. My wife.
Still hear you. So no, you're still here.
Okay. I think she logged off another device, so she's listening with me. Yeah, he won many accolades. He was a professor, visiting professor at various institutions. But I think if I was asked what was his greatest achievement, I would say that it was actually his work at Jews College. Excuse me a minute. This is probably not so well known, but at the time that he became the principal of Jews College in the early 1990s, I think it was, 1980s, sorry, Jews College was really on its last legs. It was homeless for various reasons. It had to leave the home that it was currently then occupying. It was leaderless. The former principal, Rabbi Nachum Rabinovitz, made Aliyah, and it looked like it was going to fold. And Rabbi Sachs was appointed principal virtually as almost the last chance saloon. His great friend and supporter, Sir Stanley Calms, of later Lord Calms, offered to sponsor it, but only on the proviso that Jonathan Sachs, as he then was, Rabbi Sachs, would take over as principal. He did, and with the help of a dedicated faculty and staff, he not only kept Jews College going, they found premises right in the heart of the Jewish area in Hendon, but revived it. And today, it's now called the London School of Jewish Studies, and it does great work, particularly in the field of education. His work as chief rabbi, the Sephorim, the books that he wrote, the articles, even to this very day, there is a Sir Jonathan Sachs Trust, under whose auspices the shir is taking place. We're part of, as Zevi said, worldwide community that are giving shurim and lectures and events over literally the 24 hours or so of his Yahrtzeight. And they disseminate his works and writings even to this day. His Covenant and Conversation was a pioneer work at the time, coming out literally every week as a Torah sheet, well before it was popular for almost every man and his dog, as it were, to give out these things weekly. He started this Covenant and Conversation. But again, if I, as someone who's very close to him, can just say a little bit more than perhaps what's generally known in the public domain. Yes, he was a wonderful chief rabbi. He was a great Talmud Chacham. But I'd just like to quote a pasuk that we read on Shabbat in the Haftarah this last week. The story of Elisha, the prophet, and his right-hand man, Gehazi, met a Shunammite woman. And the Shunammite woman was quite well-to-do. She came from a well-to-do family, but she had no children. And he gave her a bracha that she would have a child, which she did. And the pasuk says that Gehazi said to this Shunammite woman, what can we do for you? Can we speak to you, to the king, or to the head of the army, the general? Can we advocate for you? Is there something that you would like us to ask the king on your behalf? And she said, no, I am a simple person, as it were. I live amongst my people. And I think these two aspects, if you like, characterized Rabbi Sachs. He was somebody who literally walked with kings, who had the ear of kings, prime ministers, ministers, and so on, very much so, and particularly in the House of Lords, which to a certain extent is the equivalent of your Senate, although it's not elected, so it doesn't quite have the same power as as your Senate does, but nevertheless it is part of Parliament, Houses of Parliament. So he was somebody who could put in a good word to the Melech, to the Prime Minister, to ministers. And yet you could certainly say about him, Besochami Anochi Yosheves, or for a man it would be Anochi Yoshev. He was somebody who dwelt amongst his people. He was very much a man of the people. And I saw this quite frequently. You literally could hear him. You switch on the television, you switch on the radio, you could hear his lectures. I saw him with ministers and so on. And yet I also saw him speaking to elderly residents in care homes. I saw him speaking to kids, literally in infant schools, in shuls, in youth, children's minyanim, etc. And he held them spellbound. It doesn't matter whether they were infants, whether they were elderly residents, as I said, in a care home, or whether he was speaking to a very learned audience of academics or indeed ministers. He was equally at home, and he knew how to speak to every single audience, and he knew how to adapt what he had to say to every audience. And that's something that's quite a rare talent. We do hear of people who are known as, a man of or woman of the people, and perhaps can also speak in other audiences, but to the level that he did was really incredible. I'd just like to say one little story. Before he became the chief rabbi, when he was the principal of Jews College, we both attended a rabbinical conference in Bournemouth. That's a seaside resort in the south of England, as I'm sure most of you will know. And I remember him saying to me, come on, let's go for a walk on the beach. And it was probably about this sort of time of night, as it is for us here, maybe slightly earlier, midnight, but we went for a midnight stroll together on the beach because he liked going for walks. And we had quite an intimate discussion at the time. He was very interested in how I was getting on and gave me some really, really great and useful advice. And that was the sort of person he was. I'm just going to conclude by saying one little short vort that I remember him saying, and in many ways this was so typical of him and of what I've been saying about him. We're talking at the moment in the Sedras about Avraham Avinu. A week or so ago we read the Sedra Lech Lecha, where Avraham Avinu was told, Lech Lecha me'artcha mi'moladetcha mi'beis avicha, go out from your land, from the place of your birth and the house of your father. And I remember because he was actually, he was a philosophy graduate from Cambridge. He got a degree in philosophy in Cambridge before he got his smichas as a rabbi. And he often would marry the two subjects, if you like, the two disciplines, and he would bring in philosophy or something of that nature, something secular, into his Torah lectures. Now, I always remember him discussing Avraham Avinu and Lech Lecha, and he referenced the debate, philosophical debate or psychological perhaps debate, in which Freud was quite prominent, about nature versus nurture. What is the most important influence on somebody's life? Is it nature? Is it his genes? Is it his literally his family background? Or is it nurture? Is it the way in which he was brought up, the society in which he was brought up? There were various experiments that were done to prove this either way. And as I said, Freud had a lot to say about this. And this is what he referenced in the Lech Lecha, that Avraham Avinu was told as it were, go out from your birthplace, you're becoming a new person. You might be the son of Terach, who was an idolater, and so on, but God said, go out from that completely, that your nature will change. Go out from your father's house, where literally you're subject to a bad influence. So Avraham Avinu, if you like, had to change his entire nature and nurture and leave that totally behind. And then we saw later on, of course, that he was given a Shinoi Hashem, a change of name. His name was changed from Avram to Avraham. And this also symbolized the fact that he was becoming a completely new person. We see this as well with a ger tzedek, a convert who converts to Judaism, is considered as if the Chazal, the rabbis say, ger shenitgayer katan shenolad dami, becomes like somebody who is reborn. So, for example, if two brothers become gerim, become converts together, and then one sadly passes away, the other does not have to sit shiva for him, because although they're literally physically brothers, because they converted, it was almost as if they were both reborn when they were converted, and therefore they're not technically halachically brothers. And this is how he referenced the command to Avraham Avinu, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'moladecha u'mi beis avicha. He was able to synthesize, if you like, to marry up his academic prowess together with his incredible rabbinic learning, all of which came together with his brilliant mind as well. So he had, if you like, the advantage of a brilliant mind. He was able to dissect the subject, and some of his shiurim, many of his shiurim were absolutely brilliant in their content. Not only the fact that he would bring sources from all over, both Jewish sources and secular sources, but also in the analysis, he would be able to literally put it on a plate, as I said earlier, for whatever audience he happened to be speaking to. So I think I've spoken for quite enough. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything or ask me anything, because I want to leave some time for Zevi as well. So I will end it there. Just like to wish Robertson, Lady Sachs, his son and daughters, grandchildren and family, Arichat Yamim, a long life. May his memory be a blessing, Yehi Zichro Baruch, and his teachings, of course, live on and will continue to do so.
So thank you very much, Dad. I think we'll take questions now, because I know it's 1 a.m. by you, so I'll give you an opportunity to log off and get some sleep. So let me unmute people. Hopefully it won't turn into a free-for-all, but if anybody would like to ask any questions to my father, I've unmuted everybody who wants to be unmuted. If you want to stay muted, please mute yourself. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. No, give another few seconds if people are unmuting. Okay, so we'll move on to the next segment. Let me mute everybody again. Okay.
Stay on for a bit there.
Okay. Oh, I just muted you again, Dad. But anyway, I'd like to thank my father for those wonderful insights. And I would like to share a few insights of my own. Let me put myself as the pinned video. Give me a second. Let me pin myself. Right. So the first time I told Arthur Rubenstein on Shabbos, when he asked me, do I want wine for Kiddush? And I said, if you listen to my Monday night shir this week, I will give you my answer. And it ties into the first time that I met Rabbi Sachs. I was a young boy and I used to drink the Kiddush wine in shul. It was Polwin Israeli wine. I don't know if you remember that. Anybody remembers that brand, Polwin Israeli wine. And I used to get sick. I used to be physically sick. That's why people laugh at me for not having alcohol in shul. And that's why I was able to raise so much money when I offered to drink a cup of schnapps. If we raised a lot of money for the Ata Horesa on Simchas Torah, which got a lot of cheer when I had downed my cup of whiskey. But I used to get physically sick and so on. So Rabbi Sachs came to Manchester, and he was due to open the Whitefield mikveh, Whitefield just outside Manchester, to open the Whitefield New Ladies Mikveh. And he was newly appointed as the chief rabbi in 1991, and I was like 7 at the time, and I was desperate to go and see him, but I was sick, and I remember having to beg my parents, don't worry, I was only sick because of the wine, and I was sick many weeks in a row until I had to stop drinking the wine for Kiddush. But I had to beg my parents. I said, I'm not really sick. It's only because I had these issues. I had the wine. If I don't have the wine, I'll be fine. And eventually they let me go. And I remember going, and he had to share that we walked down the mikveh, and I remember I was spellbound. And that was the first time I met Rabbi Sachs. But my biggest inspiration, and this is how people have heard me say this before, and how I lived my life as a rabbi made a real impression upon me. We all know Rabbi Sachs has produced over I think it's over 40 books or something that have been produced by him and in his name. But before he really started to produce books on a regular scale, he used to produce little pamphlets for shuls to give out before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Rabbi Sachs's guide to the Yom Noraim, he would have his sayings, his ideas, very small. I don't have anyone with me. I don't know if my dad has any with him, although he's muted now. But and in that, right at the back, he had a little paragraph, and it said, what is the job of a rabbi? And he quoted from Reb Soloveitchik's book, Halachic Man, page 91. And I remembered it for 20 years, because in England, I couldn't find a Rabbi Soloveitchik Halachic Man until a couple of years ago, I went to Cleveland for a wedding, and I finally got my hands on a Halachic Man. And sure enough, I turned to page 91. And then a few weeks ago, somebody was throwing out shemos to be buried, and I happened to notice a Halachic Man, so I took it for myself. And sure enough, on page 91 was the phrase that changed my life as a rabbi. And he said, what is the job of a rabbi? Reb Chaim Brisk answers, to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone, to protect the dignity of the poor, and to save the oppressed from the hands of his oppressor. And that was a small little paragraph he had in his book. And actually, I was thinking to myself, I've said this before, wow, that's what you need a rabbi for, to do these things. You would have thought a rabbi would teach Torah, would give shiurim, it would be fantastic. But no, now is not the time to delve into this, but that really changed my course of my thinking, my understanding. It's not his own fault, because it was Chaim Brisk, but it was certainly something that he mentioned that changed my life. But I do want to show you, I have some artifacts that you might be interested in. This here, Office of the Chief Rabbi, as you can see it, I got my name on it. This is from the Chief Rabbi's conference when I was a rabbi in England, and I went to his conference. I kept this. This was the only one I went to that he was there, and I kept it. It moved with me from England to New York, and then from New York to Florida. So it's a little bit tatty and worn for wear. But I opened it up the other day. I still have all my notes from that conference in there, and I have these notes that I wrote. So these are like 12 years ago. And he also wrote that one must live as a Jew, and I got this written down, a quote from him, that one must live as a Jew and talk with the voice of Torah. And as a rabbi, it always struck me that he was so popular. He had such a stage. He was such an advocate, but most of all, he was an advocate. He was not an apologist for Judaism, and he was not an apologist for Orthodox Judaism. He stood up for the Torah. He stood up for the Torah way of life, and he stood up for being somebody that should value Torah, and throughout all the people he connected with, he had this wonderful ability to connect with people. But above all, he stayed true to the Torah, and he encouraged everybody to be able to stay true to the Torah. And he wrote, as you know, many books, or he wrote commentaries on the Machzor, the Koran Art Scroll, the Koran Machzor, and he wrote the Koran Siddur. And I have here also a note from him on one of the other pages where he talks about, here, another note that I have written from his conference, from his speech was, teach people how to daven. And I've underlined, he said, really important, that it was really important to teach people how to daven. And that was something that he, by writing his Siddur, the Koran Siddur and the Koran Machzor, that is certainly something that he really lived, he believed in, and he lived to be able to teach people how to daven. And another story, I did look for this wedding card he sent me, but I couldn't find it, unfortunately. I found all my other wedding cards that we'd kept, but not the one from Rabbi Sachs that I wanted to show you. So in the UK, anybody who gets married has to be licensed by the office of the chief rabbi. I suppose it's a bit similar to what goes on in Israel. So we have a record of everybody going back 300 years. And in America, they told me they are jealous of the British system. So anybody who's married, we know they got married, Orthodox shul with their parents, at the suba, we know they're Jewish. There's no issues. Everything is documented. So of course, you pay a fee. It was £100. I don't know if it's gone up since then or not. I don't know. But they check you out and they give you a certificate that you're Jewish, and if a woman is unmarried until she gets married, and of course then she is married, and that's the end of that certificate. And they do all the research, the background. My mother-in-law always tells the story of horror when she got called up by this big rabbi asking her questions about Judaism, asking if she knew what the Shema was, and asking how to prove that she was Jewish and that my wife had not been married. And she thought it was a joke and she didn't know what was going on, which was always quite a funny story in my family. But that goes to show the lengths that they went to check people out. So I sent in my money, I sent in my license, whatever, and he sends back a card where he sends everybody a wedding card, right? Obviously, it's in the font of his handwriting, and he signs it, personal written signature. He actually signs it, each one individually, and he sends it off, and everybody gets one of those. So I received mine in the mail. It's a shame I didn't have it to show you. And I open it up, and out drops my £100 check that I'd sent in for my license. He'd sent it back to me, and he'd written a little handwritten note with the money he sent back. And he put in, Dad, you probably remember this. I'll unmute you so you can join in. He said, I do not charge rabbis for getting married. Now, most rabbis are married before they become a rabbi, but I was a rabbi of a shul before I got married anyway. So he went back, and I still remember, made a big impression on it. That was really nice, very touching, that the chief rabbi had seen my my license. He'd looked over it, and he'd seen that, yes, I was a rabbi. I was one of his rabbis. I've got a certificate from him that he's approved me. I should have had it with me, shouldn't I? I send it to all the jobs I apply for. Approval from Rabbi Sachs, his approval that I can run a shul and I can be trusted to lead an Orthodox shul, and that he decided that I should have my money back because he's not going to charge a rabbi. And that was something that I held dear to me. There's also something, I want to finish off. What time is it? 8:06. I know we asked for questions before and nobody answered, but we'll see, give some more time for questions. I do want to read out something from Rabbi Sachs. Many thoughts that he had, of course, but I chose something that speaks to me, how I understood him and how I live my life. And I wanted to share that and read that with you. Rabbi Sachs says, this was published in Great Britain as Radical Then, Radical Now, page 55, if anybody has that book and wants to check up the reference. He wrote, Judaism begins not in wonder that the world is, but in protest that the world is not as it ought to be. It is in that cry, that sacred discontent, that Abraham's journey begins. The easy answer would be to deny the reality of either God or evil. Then the contradiction would disappear, and we could live at peace with the world. But to a Jew is to have the courage to refuse easy answers and to reject either consolation or despair. God exists, therefore life has a purpose. Evil exists, therefore we have not yet achieved that purpose. Until then, we must travel, just as Abraham and Sarah traveled, to begin the task of shaping a different kind of world. And I chose that thought because that's certainly how he lived his life. That's certainly how he tried to help others to answer questions, but even to understand that if you don't have the answers to the questions, It's okay to have the questions. We ask questions about the Holocaust and evil, but to have that inner struggle as a Jew that we constantly struggle with our feelings, our emotions. Should I be a better Jew? Should I be a better person? Should I help the world? Should I improve the world? And that is something that he was very, very much a proponent of, and he sought to educate people to that sense. And I think that's something that sums him up. And as we say, he Zichro Baruch. I think we were going to end that. We were going to end with a Kel Molly, weren't we?
Yes.
So you want to say the Kel Molly on behalf of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. Let me put you as the pinned video. Give me a second to find you. Yes. There we go. I'm going to pin you. Okay.
Yes, I do remember the incident when he returned your check. And by the way, it is still £100, by the way. It hasn't gone up. But do you know how much it was when I first started as a rabbi in 1982?
Let me see. £10?
£6. Because that hadn't gone up in 40 years or something. Then it went up bit by bit and eventually to 100. But anyway, it is still 100. Yeah, okay. So we'll say a Kel Malay Rachamim for the Yahrtzeight of Rabbi Sachs. Chrono Livracha. Eila Malay Rachamim Sheichem Bamaroimim Hamzim Nachana Chayna Al Kaveh Ashchina B'malaz Kedoshim Adayim Kazoy Harorok Yamazim Pesenishmas More Moreno Rav Yaakov Tzvi Reb David Aryeh Rav Horoshiv Rav HaKoilel Limdinas Britannia V'chever Hamim Bavush on Mizvalelim Badali Az Nishmozoi Began Eden Tehem Menuchazoi Lochem Al Rachamim Yastirei of Zezing Lavav Li'ailamim V'Yisroi B'Zvachim Ez Nishma Sai Adonai Hunach Alasai V'Yanach B'Shalom HaMishkavai V'Naimar Amen.
Thank you. He's Baruch. I realized that one of the reasons people might not ask questions is because we normally turn off the recording before people ask questions so nobody can be embarrassed. So let me stop the recording. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.